The United States begins this weekend amid a period of heightened national tension and momentous political turbulence. In multiple cities, federal law enforcement actions have sparked protests and serious debate about the scope and conduct of immigration enforcement operations. At the same time, U.S. foreign policy actions, both overt and secretive, continue to draw intense scrutiny domestically and internationally. Economic indicators released yesterday show a faltering labor market that has workers and policymakers alike questioning the resilience of the economy. Against these backdrops, Congress, states, and civic leaders are navigating a fractious political landscape, with disputes over federal authority and civil liberties at the forefront. Below you will find an in-depth exploration of the key stories shaping the U.S. today, including developments in immigration enforcement controversies, international military engagement, economic signals, and broader social responses. 1. Immigration enforcement and civil unrest. ICE shooting in Minneapolis. National outrage and protests. One of the most consequential stories dominating U.S. headlines today is the aftermath of a federal immigration enforcement action in Minneapolis that ended in tragedy and ignited widespread controversy. A U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement ICE agent fatally shot 37-year-old Renee Good in South Minneapolis earlier this week. Good, a U.S. citizen, was reportedly acting as a legal observer during the operation, and her death has raised deep questions about the conduct of federal law enforcement officers and the oversight of such operations. The Department of Homeland Security claims she attempted to run over officers, but local officials and community advocates have strongly disputed this version of events, pointing to video evidence and calling for transparency. This dispute has been central to public outrage and protests across Minneapolis and other cities. State and local officials are pushing back. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz activated the State Emergency Operations Center and set a press conference for further updates on public safety efforts, underscoring the intensity of concern from elected leaders. Nationwide response and federal pushback. The incident has sparked national demonstrations and political pressure. According to reporting that synthesizes multiple incidents linked to federal immigration enforcement, at least 2 other shootings involving federal agents occurred in recent days, including one in Portland, Oregon. Protesters and civil liberties advocates say these shootings reflect systemic issues within federal law enforcement operations, and are calling for investigations and limitations on funding for ICE and related agencies. Republican defenders of current policy frame the shootings as responses to violent threats or suspected criminal behavior, but Democrats and local leaders argue these justifications mask a broader pattern of excessive force and lack of local accountability. Operation Salvo expanded enforcement in NYC in response to the backlash. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem held a press briefing announcing a federal crackdown referred to as Operation Salvo in New York City. The operation, initially aimed at targeting gang networks, has already resulted in more than 50 arrests, though critics argue it illustrates a continuation rather than a recalibration of enforcement tactics. This development underscores the federal government's dual approach, defending its enforcement stance while seeking to cast such efforts in terms of broader national safety rather than targeted civil actions. 2. Foreign policy and military engagement. United States military action in Venezuela. In early January, the U.S. launched a classified military operation, codename Operation Absolute Resolve, targeting the leadership of Venezuela. U.S. military and intelligence units executed airstrikes in northern Venezuela and captured former President Maduro and his wife in Caracas. This dramatic escalation has positioned the United States at the center of one of the hemisphere's most controversial military actions in decades. Following the operation, President Donald Trump publicly stated the U.S. would administer Venezuelan oil resources for an unspecified period, fueling debate over the legal and geopolitical ramifications of such a policy. Political response in Washington. The U.S. Senate has witnessed internal friction over these actions, with bipartisan pushes to limit further military escalation. Some legislators are advancing measures aiming to constrain unilateral presidential military action, reflecting a rare moment of cross-aisle concern about executive war powers. Internationally, U.S. moves have triggered scrutiny from NATO allies and regional partners, particularly regarding sovereignty norms and broader strategic intent. 3. Economic signals and labor market conditions. December jobs report. Weak growth. Economic data released yesterday painted a mixed portrait of the U.S. labor market. In December, employers added only 50,000 jobs, falling short of forecasts and marking one of the slowest periods of job creation in several years. While the unemployment rate ticked slightly lower, analysts warned that the subdued hiring rate could signal broader economic challenges. This pattern of slow job growth has dampened expectations for a near-term Federal Reserve interest rate cut, despite some easing in food price inflation and rising consumer confidence. Sector highlights. Growth sectors included food services, healthcare, and social assistance, while traditional retail continued to shed jobs, a trend that could reflect structural shifts in the economy. The job report has amplified debate among economists and policymakers about the direction of U.S. monetary policy, with some suggesting that stubborn labor market weakness should prompt fiscal interventions. For political terrain and governance debates, capital and congressional actions. In addition to debates over military authority, Congress is grappling with internal priorities spanning social services, homeland security funding, and oversight of federal law enforcement. While some Republicans remain vocal in defending executive authority, Democrats are increasingly framing federal enforcement incidents as evidentiary of unchecked power. 5. Cultural and sporting updates. Although today's headlines are dominated by politics and policy, cultural narratives continue to develop. Major athletic events such as the 2026 World Athletics Cross Country Championships hosted in Tallahassee, Florida offer a counterpoint to political tensions, showcasing U.S. participation in global sporting competition. These moments provide valuable public engagement and serve to remind the nation of civic identity. Beyond partisan conflict. Conclusion. A nation in flux. Today's U.S. headlines reflect a society navigating profound stress points, from questions about law enforcement accountability to debates over international military engagement and economic outlooks. Public trust in institutions is being tested on multiple fronts, while civic dialogue and protest movements indicate wide civic engagement. With these issues, as the nation moves forward, it will be crucial to watch how federal, state, and local leaders address accountability, economic stability, and geopolitical positioning in ways that foster unity and long-term resilience. American society, vibrant and fractious, continues to grapple with defining the balance between security and liberty, growth and fairness, and international influence and domestic accountability.